He called her a dog and struck her in front of her child. So her daughter ran for help and found an entire motorcycle club. But when the sirens blare, whose side will the law really be on? Welcome to our channel. We're so glad you're here. Before we dive into the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And if you're ready for what happens next, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel so you never miss a moment. The zenith spire didn't just scrape the sky, it pierced it, a shard of glass and steel challenging the heavens. Down on the 75th floor, Nora Callahan moved like a ghost, her presence marked only by the whisper of her supply cart's wheels against the Italian marble. The air itself felt expensive, filtered and chilled to a precise temperature, smelling of nothing at all. It was an unnatural silence, the kind that absorbed sound, leaving only the low hum of the building's circulatory system and the frantic beat of Nora's own heart. Her reflection slid across the floor-to-ceiling windows, a fleeting, weary figure against a breathtaking tapestry of city lights. She didn't look. She'd learned long ago not to. Looking out there only reminded her of the chasm between her world and the one she spent her nights polishing. This was a world of phantom boardrooms, of leather chairs that cost more than her car, and of mahogany desks that had never seen a speck of dust thanks to her. A familiar, deep ache pulsed in the small of her back, a constant companion on these long nights. Nora shifted her weight, a practiced, almost unconscious movement designed to grant a moment's relief. She rolled her shoulders, the muscles tight knots beneath her thin uniform, and kept moving. You don't stop. Stopping is how the exhaustion wins. She flexed her hands, the skin rough and chapped from years of chemical romance with industrial-strength cleaners. Calloused and dry, she instinctively tucked them into her pockets when she wasn't working, a small, private gesture of shame. The cart glided to a halt outside the executive washroom, a sanctuary of gleaming chrome and black granite. She pushed the door open, the scent of expensive, untouched soap hitting her. Every surface was a mirror. Her job was to erase any evidence of human use, to reset the stage for the powerful phantoms who would occupy this space tomorrow. She sprayed, wiped, and polished with an efficiency born of endless repetition. Her movements were fluid, economical. No wasted energy. Every calorie was accounted for, fuel to get her through the shift and home to her bed for a few precious hours of sleep. She worked in a self-imposed silence, but the building itself whispered stories. She'd heard the other night staff, the hushed, fearful way they spoke of the tower's owner, Gideon Croft. They never called him by name. It was always him, or the man upstairs. He was a ghost like her but of a different sort. He was a presence felt but rarely seen, his perfectionism a tangible pressure that settled over the building after dark. A misplaced wastebasket, a single streak on a window, these were not minor errors. They were personal insults to him, and the consequences were swift and final. Maria from the 50th floor was gone last week. No one knew why for sure, but the rumors involved a fingerprint left on his private elevator button. Nora didn't know if it was true, but she believed it. In a place like this, you believed in monsters. After finishing the washroom, she guided her cart down the silent corridor to the one place in this entire gleaming fortress that felt remotely human, the sublevel break room. The lighting here was a harsh, unflattering fluorescent yellow. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and microwave meals. It was a small, windowless box, but it was their sanctuary. And inside, at a worn laminate table, sat the entire reason for Nora's existence. 6-year-old Lily sat with her legs swinging, too short to reach the floor, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was coloring, a worn set of crayons clutched in her small fist. A half-eaten sandwich and a juice box sat beside her half-finished homework. Lily looked up as Nora entered, her face breaking into a smile that was like a sunrise in that sterile, underground room. "Mama," she whispered, her voice a small, bright bell. "Hey, my little owlet," Nora whispered back, her own voice softening, the hard edges of her night-worn resolve melting away. "Still awake?" Lily nodded proudly, holding up her drawing. It was a picture of a towering, pointy building with a stick-figure woman and a smaller stick-figure girl holding hands at the bottom. "It's us," she explained. "At the zenith spire." A lump formed in Nora's throat. She knelt, ignoring the protest from her knees, and hugged her daughter. Lily smelled of crayons and peanut butter, a scent so wonderfully, beautifully real it almost made Nora dizzy. "It's beautiful, baby," she murmured into her hair. They shared the other half of Lily's sandwich, their conversation a series of soft whispers, a secret language in the heart of the silent beast. This was their ritual. For 30 minutes every night, the world shrank to this small table. The cold, opulent tower, the phantom billionaire, the aching exhaustion, it all faded away, replaced by the simple, profound warmth of her daughter's presence. "Can I help, Mama?" Lily asked, her eyes bright with earnestness. Nora's heart ached with a love so fierce it was a physical pain. She wanted to tell her to rest, to sleep, to just be a child. But she saw the need in Lily's eyes, the need to be a part of her world, to share the burden she was too young to understand. "Of course, sweetie," Nora said, forcing a smile. She handed Lily a soft, clean microfiber cloth. "You can be in charge of making the table legs extra shiny." Lily beamed, sliding off her chair with a sense of profound purpose. She began to meticulously wipe down the already clean chrome legs of the breakroom table, her small face a mask of concentration. Nora watched her, a bittersweet pang in her chest. This was not the childhood she had dreamed of for her daughter. A childhood spent in the forgotten corners of a billionaire's empire, where her playground was a break room and her lullabies were the hum of industrial ventilation. Nora stood up, the ache in her back returning with a vengeance. She had 4 more floors to go. 4 more hours until the sun would rise, and they could escape back to their tiny apartment, their real life. She looked at her daughter, so small and so resilient, and felt a surge of grim determination. She would endure this. She would endure the invisibility, the exhaustion, the quiet desperation. She would let this place take its pound of flesh every night, because Lily deserved a world beyond these sterile walls. And Nora would scrub floors until her hands bled to give it to her. She was fighting a system designed to look right through her, a world that celebrated the Gideons and erased the Noras. If you believe every person's hard work deserves to be seen and respected, hit that like button. Only people who think they're better than others will keep scrolling. The elevator doors slid open with a sound like a sighing vault, a soft, expensive chime that was a prelude to chaos. Nora's head snapped up. It was the private executive elevator, the one that hummed directly from the penthouse suites and the subterranean garage. At this hour, that chime was a herald of doom. Her muscles tensed, a conditioned response to unscheduled appearances by the building's gods. Out they spilled, a pack of them. 4 men in tailored suits that looked like they were spun from shadows and moonlight. Their laughter was a harsh, barking sound that shattered the lobby's cathedral-like silence. It echoed off the marble floors and the vast, cold panes of glass, a sound of careless, unrestrained power. They moved as one, a swirling vortex of arrogance, with Gideon Croft at its calm, magnetic center. He wasn't the loudest, but his presence was an anchor, pulling all attention toward him. He had a glass of amber liquid in his hand, and he surveyed the lobby. His lobby, with the bored expression of a king surveying lands he had long since conquered. Nora's first instinct was pure survival. Become invisible. She ducked her head, her world shrinking to the scuffed toes of her work shoes, and began to wheel her cart away, aiming for the shadowed archway of a little-used corridor. She moved with a practiced quietness, trying to melt into the background, to become just another fixture of the building, inanimate and unworthy of notice. She could feel the vibrations of their expensive shoes on the floor, the deep baritone of their voices cutting through the air. They were treating the space like their personal clubhouse, tossing a set of keys back and forth, one of them nearly colliding with a $1 million sculpture without a flicker of concern. She almost made it. She was just a few feet from the corridor's relative safety when a different kind of silence fell within their boisterous circle. It was a subtle shift, a change in the atmosphere that made the hairs on Nora's arms stand on end. She risked a glance, and that's when she saw him. He stood slightly apart from the others, his suit a shade darker, his posture more relaxed but somehow more dangerous. This was Julian Vance. While the others were loud, he was observant, his eyes sweeping the lobby with a cool, appraising quality. He wasn't just looking, he was scanning, cataloging. And then his gaze landed on her. It wasn't a glance. It wasn't a look of surprise or annoyance at seeing a cleaner in his path. It was the look of a collector who had just spotted a rare, unexpected specimen. His eyes, a pale, piercing blue, didn't meet hers. They passed over her, cataloging her worn uniform, the tired lines around her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. There was no recognition of her as a person. It was a gaze of pure, detached assessment, followed by a flicker of something that might have been amusement. A slow, knowing smile touched the corners of his mouth, a private little secret just for himself. He had found something interesting in this sterile, predictable environment. Nora's blood ran cold. She immediately dropped her gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Don't look. Don't engage. Be a ghost. But it was too late. With a quiet word to Gideon, Julian detached himself from the group. He moved with a liquid grace, a predator's unhurried confidence. The sound of his handcrafted leather shoes on the marble was a deliberate, rhythmic approach, each step a tightening coil of dread in Nora's stomach. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, gripping the handle of her cart so tightly her knuckles turned white. Just pass by. Please just pass by. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could smell the rich, peaty scent of expensive scotch on his breath, mingled with a sharp, citrusy cologne. The air around him felt charged, sucking the oxygen out of her space. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was smooth as silk, a low, cultured purr that was completely at odds with the predatory glint in his eyes. Nora forced herself to look up, keeping her expression neutral, her gaze directed at his perfectly knotted tie rather than his face. "Sir?" Her own voice sounded thin, fragile. "I seem to be a bit turned around," he continued, that small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "My associates are heading up to the rooftop lounge, but I was told there was a more direct elevator. The service lift, I believe? I have a package to retrieve from my car first. Something I'd rather not parade through the main entrance." He gestured vaguely with a hand that sported a heavy, platinum watch. It was a lie. A transparent, perfectly constructed lie. The service elevators were on the other side of the building, clearly marked, and not used for direct access to anything but storage and maintenance shafts. He knew it. She knew it. But the lie was the point. It was the pretense, the key that unlocked the door to this conversation she desperately did not want to have. He took another small step, completely invading her personal space. His gaze roamed freely now, from her neatly tied hair down to her worn-out shoes. "You must know every secret corner of this place, working these quiet hours," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more intimate, more suggestive. "A woman like you see everything." The insinuation hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. A woman like you. He wasn't asking for directions. He was toying with her. This wasn't a conversation. It was an assertion of power, a demonstration that he could stop her, speak to her, look at her however he wanted, whenever he wanted, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. The lobby, once a vast empty space, now felt like a tiny airless box with him standing at the only exit. Her ghost-like invisibility had been stripped away, leaving her exposed and pinned under the predatory gaze of a wolf who had just found his evening's entertainment. With a dismissive wave of his hand, Julian gestured toward the far end of the lobby. "You guys go on ahead," he said to his companions, his voice a smooth, confident purr. "I'll be right up. Just want to appreciate the architecture." Gideon Croft gave him a knowing smirk, a silent acknowledgement of the hunt, before turning to lead the others away. Their raucous laughter faded as they disappeared into another elevator, leaving Nora alone in the vast, silent marble expanse with the wolf. The moment they were gone, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with a predatory stillness. Julian turned his full attention back to Nora, his smile widening. It didn't reach his eyes. Those remained cold, appraising, fixed on her like a pinned butterfly. He took a slow, deliberate step closer, closing the remaining distance between them. "Now," he began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, "where were we? Ah yes. A woman like you working so hard in the dead of night. It doesn't seem fair, does it?" He gestured around the opulent lobby. "All this, and you're on your hands and knees polishing it. There are easier ways to live. Much easier." Nora's grip on her cart was the only thing keeping her grounded. She kept her eyes fixed on a point just past his shoulder, refusing to meet his gaze. "I don't mind the work, sir. It's an honest living." Julian chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Honest, yes, but is it satisfying? A woman with your presence shouldn't be invisible." He leaned in closer, the scent of his scotch and cologne overwhelming her senses. "I'm a very generous man," he whispered, his words slithering into the air. "I appreciate beauty, and I believe in rewarding it. A weekend in the Hamptons, a shopping spree that would make your head spin. Your life could be very different. All it takes is a little appreciation in return. There it was. The proposition, wrapped in the language of a business transaction, as if he were negotiating for a piece of art. He wasn't offering, he was announcing the terms of her acquisition. Every muscle in Nora's body went rigid. This was a line she had seen men like him approach before, but none had ever crossed it with such blatant, arrogant certainty. For a beat, she felt the cold grip of fear, the voice of survival whispering to just nod, to placate him, to get away. But then she thought of Lily sleeping soundly in the break room, and a different kind of fire ignited in her veins. A cold, hard resolve. She finally lifted her head and for the first time, met his eyes directly. Her gaze was level, clear, and utterly devoid of the fear he expected to see. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but it cut through his cloying charm like a shard of glass. "Sir," she said, each word a carefully placed stone, "I'm just here to do my job." The change in him was instantaneous and terrifying. The silken mask of the smooth operator evaporated, and the raw, menacing entitlement beneath was laid bare. His smile vanished, replaced by a sneer of disbelief, then a flash of pure rage. Her refusal wasn't just a rejection, it was an insult to his very being. "You're what?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a gravelly threat. Before she could react, his hand shot out and clamped down on her arm. His grip was like a steel vice, fingers digging painfully into her bicep. The sudden, brutal force of it stole her breath. "Don't you dare," he snarled, his face inches from hers, his eyes blazing with fury. "You don't say no to me. You have no idea what's good for you." Pain lanced up her arm, but it was the humiliation that burned hotter. A surge of adrenaline, fierce and primal, flooded her system. This was her body, her space, her dignity. With a sharp cry, she wrenched her arm back, tearing it from his grasp with a strength that surprised them both. She stumbled back a step, her chest heaving, her eyes flashing with a fire that matched his own. Her voice was no longer quiet. It was a low, guttural command forged in years of silent struggle. "Don't touch me." For a moment, Julian stood there, stunned, the imprint of his fingers red on her arm. The look on his face was one of utter shock, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken back to him. Then that shock morphed into a dark, public fury. The private humiliation was not enough, she had to be punished in front of his pack. He spun on his heel and strode back toward the center of the lobby, his movements stiff with rage. Gideon and the others had just stepped out of the other elevator, having apparently changed their minds about the rooftop. Julian's voice boomed, a theatrical projection of wounded pride that filled the cavernous space. "Gideon," he barked, pointing a trembling finger back at Nora. "You need to talk to your dog. She thinks she's some kind of hotshot." The words hung in the air, echoing off the marble. Dog. The dehumanization was absolute, a verbal stripping of her personhood. Nora stood frozen, the blood draining from her face. Every eye in the room, Gideon's, his associates, even the night security guards by the front desk, snapped to her. She was no longer a ghost. She was an exhibit pinned by the spotlight of his scorn. Julian wasn't finished. He reveled in his audience, his voice dripping with venom. "I was being generous. I offered her a chance at a better life, and this thing has the audacity to disrespect me." He let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Honestly, Gideon, you're paying her to clean your floors. Tell her what a lucky girl she is to even get my attention. Tell her I could change her life if she agrees to be an obedient little thing." The air crackled with a sick, tense energy. No one spoke. Gideon's face was a mask of cold fury, but it was directed entirely at Nora. His friends watched with detached, smirking amusement, enjoying the show. In that moment, Nora was utterly, terrifyingly alone, stripped bare of her dignity and left to stand in the ruins of her own violated boundaries, the word dog still ringing in the crushing silence. Julian just called a human being a dog for saying no. If you find that absolutely disgusting and believe everyone has the right to their own body and dignity, comment, respect, below. Let's drown out the voices of predators. Gideon Croft's eyes, which had been alight with a cruel, detached amusement, hardened into chips of obsidian. Julian's public humiliation had created a debt, and Gideon was the kind of man who always saw debts paid, especially when they concerned his own authority. He moved forward, not with the predatory grace of Julian, but with the heavy, unyielding momentum of a tectonic plate shifting. He stopped a few feet from Nora, his immense presence sucking all the remaining warmth from the air. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His tone was a low, chillingly calm rumble that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You have a job here," he began, his gaze boring into her, "because I allow it. You exist in this building because my generosity permits you to. Your purpose is to be silent, to be efficient, and to be invisible. Do you understand what happens when one of my tools forgets its purpose?" Nora stood her ground, her body trembling but her chin held high. The red mark on her arm from Julian's grip was a stark reminder of what had just happened. She couldn't find her voice, so she just stared back, her silence its own form of defiance. Her silence was a mistake. It was fuel. "You think you have the right to an opinion?" Gideon's voice dropped even lower, laced with a venom that was pure poison. "You think you have the right to embarrass my guest? To embarrass me?" He took another step, his shadow falling over her completely. "You are a ghost in my world. You are the smudges I pay you to wipe away. Ingratitude is a luxury you cannot afford, and I am beginning to think you have forgotten your place." His words were surgical strikes, each one aimed at the core of her dignity, designed to dismantle her piece by piece. He was reminding her that in his world, her personhood was a privilege, not a right, and it could be revoked at any moment. The other men watched, their smirks gone, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. They were watching a master at work, a king putting a peasant back in her place. It was at that moment that a small, shuffling sound came from the corridor leading to the break room. A tiny figure emerged from the shadows. Lily stood there, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, her favorite worn teddy bear clutched in one hand. She saw the giant, angry men. She saw her mother, standing alone, looking small and pale under the harsh lobby lights. Her child's mind didn't understand the nuances of corporate power or toxic masculinity, but it understood fear. It understood that her mommy was in trouble. With a small, determined whimper, she ran forward. She didn't make it to Nora. She stopped a few feet in front of her, turning to face the towering figure of Gideon Croft, and stood there. A tiny, trembling shield in a wrinkled blue dress. "Leave my mommy alone," she whispered, her voice barely audible but vibrating with a fierce, protective love. A sane man would have stopped. A decent man would have been ashamed. But Gideon Croft was neither. He saw the child not as a reason to de-escalate, but as the ultimate symbol of Nora's insolence. In his twisted view, she was now using her own child as a weapon against him. His face, which had been a mask of cold fury, contorted into something truly ugly. "You bring this thing into my building?" he snarled, his voice finally cracking with unrestrained rage. "You hide behind a child?" He moved so fast Nora didn't have time to react. He didn't touch Lily, but he lunged past her. He shoved Nora with the full force of his body. It wasn't a push, it was an act of violent displacement. The world tilted crazily as Nora stumbled backward, her work shoes sliding on the polished marble. She flailed her arms, trying to catch her balance, a strangled cry escaping her lips. As she was falling off balance and utterly defenseless, his hand came up. The sound of the slap was not a dull thud. It was a sharp, explosive crack that ripped through the lobby's silence like a gunshot. It echoed off the distant walls, a sound so brutal and final it seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. Nora's head snapped to the side, a universe of white-hot pain exploding on her cheek. She crashed to the floor, the impact jarring every bone in her body. For a second, there was only the ringing in her ears and the coppery taste of blood in her mouth. Then came the scream. It wasn't a child's cry. It was a sound torn from the deepest, most primal part of Lily's soul. A raw, piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated terror that shattered the last vestiges of the lobby's oppressive silence. It was the sound of a world breaking, of innocence being murdered. That single, horrifying sound propelled her into motion. Her eyes were wide with a terror so profound it was almost vacant. She turned and ran. Not to her mother, but away. Away from the monster. Away from the violence she couldn't comprehend. She bolted past Julian, who took an involuntary step back. She ran past the other men who stood frozen, their faces masks of shock. She ran across the vast, empty expanse of the lobby, her small feet slapping against the cold marble. She hit the brass pushbar on the massive glass doors with her whole body and burst out into the unforgiving chill of the night, a small, sobbing ghost disappearing into the concrete canyons of the city. The lobby was left in a stunned, ringing silence. The only sounds were the faint, distant wail of a far-off siren and the gentle whoosh of the heavy glass doors swinging slowly shut, leaving Nora on the floor, the world spinning, a fiery handprint blazing on her cheek, staring at the empty space where her daughter had just been. A man who hits a woman in front of her child is the lowest form of coward. If you stand against violence and abuse in all its forms, hit subscribe right now. The only people who won't are the ones who make excuses for monsters like Gideon. The city was a monster of concrete and glass, and Lily was a firefly caught in its jaws. She ran without direction, fueled by a terror that burned brighter than any street lamp. Her bare feet slapped against the unforgiving pavement, each step a jolt of cold, gritty pain that shot up her legs. The world was a smear of light and shadow, streaking headlights, the lurid glow of neon signs, the deep, impenetrable black of alleyways. Her small, ragged sobs were swallowed whole by the city's relentless hum. The distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a passing subway, the cacophony of a world that was utterly indifferent to her breaking heart. She didn't know how long she ran. One block bled into the next in a terrifying, endless loop. Her lungs were on fire, her legs felt like lead, and the image of her mother falling was a jagged shard of glass stuck behind her eyes. A corner, another corner, a street that looked just like the last. She was lost, a tiny vessel adrift in a vast, merciless ocean. It was a stray curb that finally brought her down. Her foot caught, and she tumbled forward, her hands and knees scraping hard against the rough asphalt. The fall knocked the wind out of her, and for a moment, all she could do was lie there, a crumpled heap on the sidewalk, the raw pain of her scrapes a dull echo of the agony in her chest. When she pushed herself up, blinking through a fresh wave of hot tears, she saw them. They were giants. Parked in a neat, menacing row outside a 24-hour diner that cast a greasy yellow glow, were a dozen motorcycles that looked like sleeping iron beasts. Leaning against the bikes and sitting at a grimy outdoor table were the men who rode them. They were a wall of black leather, worn denim, and faded tattoos that snaked up their arms and necks. One man laughed, a deep, rumbling sound like rocks grinding together, and the sight of it, the sheer intimidating size and power of them, sent a fresh spike of fear through Lily. These were the monsters her mother had warned her to stay away from. But she had nowhere else to go. The monster behind her was worse. Gathering every ounce of courage she had left, she stumbled toward them. Her approach was a hesitant, lurching gait, her small frame trembling uncontrollably. A few of them noticed her, their laughter and conversation tapering off. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. The atmosphere shifted from casual camaraderie to watchful curiosity. The man at the center of the group, who had been cleaning his glasses with a bandana, looked up. He was broader than the others, his head shaved, with a thick beard that couldn't hide the hard lines of his jaw. But his eyes were different. They weren't cold or cruel. They were sharp, intelligent, and they registered her terror in an instant. This was Axel Stone. He set his glasses down slowly, his movements deliberate and calm, and stood up. He wasn't just big, he was a mountain. But as he approached her, he did something that changed everything. He dropped to one knee, bringing himself down to her level, making the mountain a hill. He put his hands on his knees, his palms open, a gesture of peace. "Hey now," he said, and his voice was nothing like she expected. It was a deep, steady baritone, like the low rumble of one of his engines, but there was a gentleness to it, a calm authority that cut through her panic. "What's going on, little one? You're a long way from home." Lily couldn't speak. The words were trapped behind a wall of sobs. All she could do was point a trembling finger back in the general direction of the zenith spire, a building she couldn't even see from here. Axe didn't rush her. He just waited, his gaze patient and unwavering. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here. Just take a breath. Can you tell me what happened?" His calmness was an anchor. She took a shuddering gasp of air and the words finally tumbled out, broken and raw, wrapped in hiccups and tears. The rich man," she stammered, her small body shaking. "In the big building, he hurt my mommy." The effect of those words was immediate and absolute. A dangerous stillness fell over the entire group. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, plunging the world from sound into a vacuum. The man who had been laughing moments before now had a face like carved granite. Another slowly crushed a paper coffee cup in his fist. No one spoke, but a single, silent message passed between them. A line had been crossed. Axe's face, which had been a mask of gentle concern, transformed. The softness in his eyes hardened into something cold, sharp, and lethal. It wasn't a wild, uncontrolled rage. It was a focused, controlled fury, the kind that was far more terrifying. He had heard the truth and he had passed judgment. He stayed kneeling for a moment longer, his eyes locked on Lily's. "He hit her?" he asked, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. Lily nodded, a single, final tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. That was all he needed. He rose to his full, intimidating height, a titan of leather and righteous anger. He turned to face his men, who were already standing, their expressions grim, their bodies coiled with a tense, waiting energy. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to explain. He just looked at them and they understood. He uttered 3 simple words, a command that was also a promise. "Let's ride." The response was instantaneous. Men swung their legs over their bikes. The quiet of the night was shattered by the sound of a dozen V-twin engines roaring to life in a deafening, thunderous chorus. It wasn't just noise. It was the sound of a different kind of power waking up, a raw, visceral force that no amount of money could buy and no skyscraper could contain. It was the sound of retribution. The sound came first, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the marble floor, rising rapidly into a deafening, earth-shaking roar. It was the sound of a gathering storm, of unleashed thunder. Inside the lobby, Gideon Croft and his associates froze, their smug expressions faltering, replaced by confusion. Gideon strode to the massive glass doors, peering out into the night. What he saw made his jaw tighten. A phalanx of motorcycles, a dozen iron horses, flooded into the building's pristine circular driveway, their headlights cutting through the darkness like angry, accusatory eyes. They parked in a perfect, menacing arc, blocking the entrance. The engines cut out in staggered succession. The sudden silence that followed was somehow more threatening than the noise. Doors opened on heavy, well-oiled hinges. Men dismounted, their movements economical and purposeful. They moved as one, a pack of shadows detaching themselves from their machines. The heavy glass doors of the zenith spire swung inward, pushed open with a force that made them shudder in their frames. Axe Stone stepped inside first. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. His presence was a physical force, a gravitational pull that immediately commanded the entire space. Behind him, the iron sentinels fanned out, forming a silent, imposing wall of black leather and grim intent. They were an invasion of the real world into this sterile, artificial bubble of wealth. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it shattered. Gideon Croft, the king in his castle, suddenly looked like what he was, a man in an expensive suit completely out of his depth. Julian Vance, who had been preening with vicarious power, took an involuntary step back, his face paling. The other associates, who had been enjoying the spectacle, now looked for the nearest exit. Axe's gaze swept the room, taking in every detail with a chilling quickness. He saw the scattered contents of Nora's cart. He saw the raw red handprint blooming on Nora's cheek as she struggled to push herself up off the cold floor. His eyes, hard as flint, finally settled on Julian, then moved to Gideon. The look in them was not one of hot rage, but of cold, calculating judgment. "You," Axe said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from the very floor. He took a single, deliberate step forward, his boots making no sound on the polished marble. Nora, still on her knees, looked up, her vision blurry with tears. She saw these giants, these terrifying men, and felt an impossible surge of hope. They were here for her. Her daughter had done it. Her daughter had brought the thunder. Gideon found his voice, though it was strained, brittle. "You are trespassing. I suggest you leave before I have security." "Shut up," Axe said, not as a shout but as a simple statement of fact. He never took his eyes off Julian. "You put your hands on her." Julian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I don't know what you're talking about. This is a private matter." "It stopped being private," Axe growled, taking another step, "when the little girl came screaming for help. It was then that the first distant wail pierced the night. A siren. Faint at first, but growing rapidly, multiplying into a chorus of approaching alarms. A flicker of relief crossed Nora's face. Help. Real help is coming." Gideon heard it too, and the fear in his eyes was instantly replaced by a smug, confident smirk. He straightened his tie. He was back on his home turf. "It seems my security is more efficient than I thought," he said, his voice dripping with restored arrogance. Axe paused, his head tilting slightly at the sound. His men shifted, their hands unclenching, a silent question in their eyes. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. The siren screamed to a halt outside. Doors slammed. The lobby was flooded with flashing red and blue lights, painting the pristine white walls in strobing colors of emergency. The front doors burst open again, and this time it was uniformed police officers who stormed in, their movements tactical and aggressive. At the lead was a hardened, gray-haired captain, his face a mask of grim professionalism. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The captain's eyes swept the scene, but they didn't linger on Nora's bruised face or her torn uniform. He didn't look at Gideon or his smirking friends. His gaze, and the gaze of all his officers, was locked entirely on the iron sentinels. They saw the leather, the tattoos, the size of the men, and their minds were already made up. "Nobody move," the captain barked, his voice a whip crack of authority. Guns were drawn. Not pistols, but heavy-duty tactical rifles, their metallic clicks echoing in the cavernous space. And every single one of them was pointed directly at the bikers. Axe slowly raised his hands, a look of grim understanding dawning on his face. "Officer," he started, his voice calm, "there's been a misunderstanding. This woman has been assaulted." The captain ignored him completely. His eyes met Gideon's for a fraction of a second, and in that fleeting glance, an entire corrupt bargain was sealed. A subtle nod. An unspoken agreement. "I said nobody move," the captain repeated, his focus unwavering. He gestured with his head toward the bikers. "On your knees. Hands behind your head. Now." Nora's fragile hope shattered into a million pieces. "No," she whispered, the word a breathless puff of air. "No, you don't understand, they were helping me. He hit me." She pointed a trembling finger at Gideon. The captain didn't even give her a cursory glance. He was a tool and he had his orders. "Ma'am, you need to stay out of this for your own safety." Gideon Croft folded his arms, a triumphant, cruel smile spreading across his face. He had made a call the moment the bikers arrived. Not to the police but to his police. The system he had paid for was here to do its job. One by one, under the barrels of a dozen guns, the iron sentinels were forced to their knees. These powerful, defiant men, her only hope, were being stripped of their power, their hands cuffed behind their backs with brutal efficiency. The sharp, metallic click-clack of the handcuffs was the sound of her world collapsing. The beat ends on Nora's face. Her eyes are wide, her expression a mask of pure, abject horror. She watches as Axe, the last to be cuffed, is forced to the ground. He turns his head and his eyes lock with hers, and in them she doesn't see defeat, but a silent, burning promise. It doesn't matter. Her avenging angels were being shackled. Her rescuers were being arrested. And the monsters were smiling. She was utterly, completely, and hopelessly alone, a prisoner in a system designed not to protect her, but to crush her. The law just sided with the abuser. Gideon's money bought him the police. If you believe justice should never be for sale, comment, "I stand with Nora right now." Let the algorithm know we're not on the side of corruption. The interrogation room was a concrete box designed to suffocate hope. The air was stale, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 coerced confessions and the faint, acrid smell of disinfectant. There was a single heavy steel table bolted to the floor, and Nora sat on one side, her hands clasped in her lap to stop them from shaking. The fiery sting on her cheek had subsided into a deep, throbbing ache, a physical reminder of her powerlessness. Through the one-way mirror, she could feel the weight of unseen eyes. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear the distant, angry shouts of men being processed, the iron sentinels. Her rescuers. Now caged because of her. The irony was a bitter pill she couldn't swallow. The door opened and the gray-haired captain stepped in. He didn't introduce himself. He moved with the weary, impatient swagger of a man who had seen it all and was bored by it. He dropped a thin file on the table and sat opposite her, leaning back in his chair with a sigh that was pure theater. He was Captain Miller, and his job wasn't to find the truth, it was to bury it. "Nora Callahan," he began, his voice flat and disinterested. He scanned a paper from the file. 42. Single mother. No priors. You keep a clean record. I respect that. He looked up, his eyes cold and devoid of sympathy. Which is why I'm going to give you a chance to walk away from this thing with your life intact. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Here's what happened tonight. A known biker gang, the Iron Sentinels, we have a file on them thicker than a phone book, broke into your place of employment. They have a history of violence and intimidation. You were scared. They threatened you. Whatever you said to the first officers on the scene was said under duress. Understand? Nora stared at him, her mind struggling to process the blatant fabrication. That's not what happened. Gideon Croft. Miller held up a hand, cutting her off with practiced ease. Let me stop you right there. Mr. Croft is a pillar of this community. A philanthropist. Mr. Vance is one of his esteemed business partners. Are you seriously going to sit there and tell me that you, a night shift cleaner, are the victim and they are the villains? That's quite a fantasy, Miss Callahan. He leaned back again, his expression hardening. A fantasy that could land you in a world of trouble. Obstruction of justice. Filing a false report. Maybe even an accessory charge. You have a daughter, right, Lily? It would be a shame if she had to visit her mother through a sheet of plexiglass. That was it. The mention of Lily. The threat, so casually delivered, was the final push. 4 hours, Nora had been drowning in a sea of fear and despair. She had been violated, assaulted, and now she was being erased. Her truth, her pain, her daughter's terror, it was all being dismissed as a fantasy. She thought of Axe and his men, locked in cells for trying to protect her. She thought of Gideon's smug, triumphant face. A cold, quiet clarity washed over her, extinguishing the fear and leaving behind something hard and unyielding in its place. Resolve. She looked down at her trembling hands and then slowly, deliberately, she lifted her head. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a glint of pure, unadulterated steel. The captain, seeing the shift, frowned. Did you hear me, Miss Callahan? I heard you, Nora said, her voice quiet but clear, stripped of its earlier tremor. She slid her worn, cracked screen phone from her pocket and placed it on the steel table. With a single, steady finger, she pushed it across the cold surface until it stopped directly in front of him. Captain Miller stared at the phone, then back at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. It's not a fantasy, Nora said, her voice shaking now, not with fear but with righteous fury. And I have proof. Miller scoffed. Proof of what? A threatening text message? Proof of everything, Nora said. She explained, her words coming faster now, a torrent of truth that could no longer be contained. I've worked jobs like this my whole life. In places where you're not a person, you're just part of the furniture. You learn things. You learn how to stay safe. You learn to expect the worst from men who have never been told no to. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Years ago, after a bad encounter with a supervisor, I developed a habit. The second I feel threatened, the second a man invades my space, my hand goes to my phone in my pocket. One press of a button. It starts recording audio. She tapped the phone on the table. That's a 3-minute file. It has Julian Vance propositioning me. It has my refusal. It has him calling me a dog for the crime of saying no. It has Gideon Croft's voice, loud and clear, accusing me of embarrassing him, calling me a tool that forgot its purpose. Her voice cracked, but she pushed on, her eyes blazing. And then it has the sound of him shoving me. The sound of his hand hitting my face. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a raw, painful whisper. And then it has my daughter's scream. It's all there. Undeniable. Captain Miller stared at the phone as if it were a live grenade. The color drained from his face. His bored, professional facade crumbled, revealing the panicked, cornered man beneath. The sneer was gone. The intimidation was gone. All that was left was the dawning, horrific realization that he had backed the wrong monster. The quiet, invisible woman in front of him had an ace in the hole, and she had just played it. The game was over. Captain Miller didn't press play. He didn't have to. The look in Nora's eyes was more damning than any recording. He saw the unshakable certainty of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. His bluff had been called, his corrupt world reduced to a single, cracked screen phone on a steel table. He stared at it, the sweat beading on his brow, the color draining from his face. For a long, silent moment, the only sound was the frantic ticking of a clock on the wall, each second a hammer blow against his crumbling authority. He finally broke, snatching his own phone and leaving the room without another word. Through the thick glass, Nora saw him making a series of frantic, hushed calls. The tone was not of a man in control, but of a man trying to contain an explosion. The explosion came in the form of two new detectives who arrived 20 minutes later. They were different. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and a man whose weary expression couldn't hide his integrity. They didn't speak to Miller, they spoke to Nora. They listened. They treated her not as an accomplice but as a victim. And when they played the recording, the entire atmosphere of the precinct seemed to hold its breath. The audio was horrifyingly clear. Julian's predatory purr. Nora's firm refusal. The sneering, dehumanizing word, dog. Gideon's cold, violent rage. And then the two sounds that sealed their fates. The sharp, sickening crack of the slap, followed by the raw, heart-shattering scream of a terrified child. When it was over, the female detective, Detective Harding, simply looked at Nora and said, "I am so sorry this happened to you. But it's over now. We've got it from here." Nora's courage just blew this conspiracy wide open. If you believe that one person's bravery can change everything, smash that like button. Let's celebrate the truth coming to light. The first order of business was to unlock the holding cells. The Iron Sentinels emerged, not with anger but with a grim, quiet dignity. Detective Harding offered a formal, sincere apology on behalf of the department. Axe just nodded, his eyes scanning the hallway until they found Nora. He walked over to her, his presence a silent, protective shield. He didn't say anything. He just stood beside her, a mountain of quiet support. In that moment she knew she was no longer alone. The final showdown was not in a boardroom or a back alley, but under the harsh fluorescent lights of the police precinct. Gideon and Julian were brought out, their arrogance replaced by a shocked, sputtering disbelief. Gideon started to bluster about his lawyers, about the mayor, about the influence he wielded. But his power had evaporated. It was just noise now. Nora stood tall, with Axe at her side. She didn't say a word. She just watched as Detective Harding read them their rights, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing the sound of justice finally being served. As they were led away, Gideon's eyes met hers. He saw the quiet, invisible woman he had tried to crush, and for the first time, he looked afraid of her. The story didn't just leak, it erupted. A local blogger got the scoop and by morning, #IStandWithNora was trending. The audio file went viral, a chilling testament to the abuse of power. The city that had been blind to Nora Callahan now saw her as a hero. A GoFundMe started by an anonymous well-wisher, though Nora suspected it had the faint scent of gasoline and leather, exploded, raising enough money for her and Lily to start over a dozen times. The support was a tidal wave of kindness. A nonprofit secured them a sunny two-bedroom apartment in a safe, quiet neighborhood with a park at the end of the street. The owner of a local, family-run cleaning company read the story and reached out personally, offering Nora a management position with a salary that made her weep, telling her, "We need more people with your integrity in charge." Life transformed. The gray exhaustion was replaced by the warm glow of a new dawn. But the most profound change was the family they gained. The Iron Sentinels became a regular fixture in their lives. Sundays were for pancake breakfasts at the local diner. Wednesdays, Axe would pick Lily up from school on his gleaming motorcycle, to the absolute delight of every kid in her class, and help her with her homework. They were gruff, tattooed, and utterly devoted, showing Lily a brand of masculinity rooted in fierce protection and gentle respect. The final scene is set a few months later in their new apartment. The room is filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of spaghetti bolognese. Nora is at the stove, a genuine relaxed smile on her face. Lily is at the kitchen table, excitedly showing Axe and two other bikers her latest drawing. The men, who look like they could tear down buildings with their bare hands, are completely captivated, listening with rapt attention. On the refrigerator, held up by a glittery star magnet, is another drawing. It's a picture of their new home. A smiling woman and a little girl are in the window. And parked out front, forming a protective circle around the house, is a row of powerful motorcycles. It isn't a picture of saviors and victims. It's a picture of a family. A strange, loud, fiercely loyal family, forged in the fires of a terrible night, now living in the quiet, beautiful light of a new day. They tried to silence her, but her truth started a movement. If you believe kindness and courage are the ultimate weapons against hate, share this story with someone who needs to see that good people still win.